welcome back. We are INFR3110 in the fall 2020 semester at Ontario Tech University. Game Engine Design and Implementation, Lecture 9, which is Week 9, Part 1 of our broadcast, probably the only part this time around, and we're talking about human interface devices. That's what HID stands for. But before we get to that, let's get looking at our schedule, which I like to do every single time we're together. So we're sitting here at Week 9. We have 3 more weeks of lectures. We've got to talk about these. Now, I can't really count the last week, Week 12, as a lecture week, only because Week 12, what we're doing is we're going to be doing your final project presentations. Okay, so that's what's happening. And that's in 3 short weeks from now, really. It's not very long at all. We've done 2 project checkpoints, all right? So that's what we've kind of accomplished until now. And we have another project checkpoint where I'm going to look and see what you guys have done, how you guys are doing next week. Now, we've done these project checkpoints, are not there to make you crazy by any means. We're going to meet again on Discord next week for part of our week's lesson. And then I want to take a look and see how you guys are progressing with your project checkpoint. At the same time, individual assignment 2 should be released next week. So that's during your tutorial session. Your TA, Nicholas, will kind of step you through individual assignment number 2. So next week is going to be, I would say, a busy week in terms of your output and the stuff that you're putting out there. Also next week, if I'm not wrong, your group assignment 2, part 2, is due. So that is the second group component that's due next week, and then followed by another group the other week. And let's take a look at that just to confirm. So again, if you look up at your assignments, and I'm doing this only because I want to keep everyone on track, and so that we don't lose track of where we are. Okay, so again, you can see that the due date for group assignment 2, part 2 is November 22nd, and that's when that's happening. And the due date for assignment 2, part 3 is November 29th. So those are the 2 dates that we want to kind of keep our eye on for your group assignments. Okay, so that's when those are due. Group assignment next week, group assignment 2, part 2, and group assignment 2, part 3. So those 2 weeks in a row. So there's a couple times you're going to see that. And then week 11, so that's the week before we get into our project presentations, which is your final project and your final project checkpoint. And that's when it's kind of aligned with those parts. I'll be sitting with everyone. You'll be presenting live this time around to the entire class. So you'll go through the same exercise that you've done in the past. And you're going to be presenting your final project with regards to this class and how the stuff that you've got ready for your semester-long project. So that's what's really happening over the next few weeks. That means we have a busy few weeks in terms of evaluations, and then we're going to get right into your final exam time frame. Just after that, right? And I think we're slated for the 15th. I'm not sure if anyone's looked at it at all, but it's something like that, like the 15th or something is when our exam is supposed to happen, and I believe it happens on a Tuesday. Let's take a look at this calendar just to kind of do a look ahead. Yeah, there it is. See, so I'm pretty sure it's like in this week, which means you have, after we meet the last time, which will be week 12, you have a couple weeks between week 12 and your exam to do some studying, look over your material, all that kind of stuff, and then be ready for this week here, right? So the the middle of December, or pretty much last week of school, is when we're in our exam time frame. So that's the kind of stuff that's booked, which means we have a very, very busy week. A couple of really interesting topics left. I think we've talked about a lot of them already. And one of them is, that's coming up today is, again, human interface devices. We're going to look at things like connectivity and trends and that kind of thing. And next week, we're going to get into gameplay systems really briefly. Again, I don't anticipate the lecture is going to be very long because of our checkpoint and individual assignment 2's submission requirements. And then the final week that we're together, which is week 11 for our lecture week, we're going to get into Unity shaders, shader graph, all that kind of stuff is what we're going to be focusing on in week 11. So any kind of polish that you can put on your final project will happen between week 11 and week 12. Okay, that's kind of the plan. All right. So Logan says, so do we get the final one the 15th or the week before the 15th? That's a good question. You know, I might consider giving you guys the you know, kind of the test to do during your exam weeks. I think might be the best thing. Just to give, again, it's just to reduce your to me, I want to try and reduce stress as much as possible, because I think it's not really required. So as soon as I have it, put it that way, Logan, in and around the time we finish our last lecture, which is after on or after December 4th, I'll probably post, and most likely after, the you know, the theoretical tests. And then the final practical test, I'm probably going to give you the week of our exams. So it'll be the week of the 15th. Okay, that's chances are what I'm doing. If things change as we approach week 12, and we have a few weeks to kind of look at things, I also have to coordinate with the TA to make sure that you know, Nicholas knows what he's doing. I want to make sure that he's available for us, so that there's no, you know, if you need him for support and that kind of thing. I think that's you know, it's important that he's around. And also, I'd like to be around to help you with any questions, whether it's practical or theoretical you might have, right? Just any kind of technical issues that can happen. The good thing about doing it over a 2-week period, if I give you like you know, your theoretical test earlier, then if there's any technical issues, I can reset you, and you'll have you know, enough attempts. Practical, I don't want to give it to you the entire 2-week period, only because, not because I don't want to make it easier. I don't think it's going to make it easier, actually. It's because you have other exams, chances are, in that time frame, and that means you'll have more I don't want to, it'll almost like cause more pressure to try me taking away the pressure, and I don't feel like that's a really good strategy. So that's kind of I'll put it in a time frame. You'll have a chance to get it done, and just like last time, you'll have a week. I think that's a reasonable time to do a little practical assignment. And again, just like last time, I know Nicholas is going through the all the marking at this point too, but just like last time, I'll have different bonus sections for everybody. If you have a recommendation, hit me on Discord. I'd like to try and, you know, make it more interesting. So I know that Kennedy mentioned, you know, she'd like a writer's bonus. I'll do it. I have no problem with that. If you can get the regular stuff plus the writer's bonus or something like that, it'll be out there for you guys, right? To get. Almost like a power-up for me is how I see it, right? So if you have anything like that, where you have an idea of a bonus area for a particular person or type, you know, because I've covered most of them, you know, the other ones will be there as well, then let us know and we'll get going. And there's Bill. Okay, so that's what we've covered really is the kind of where we are right now, which we're sitting at week 9, and now we're going to get into the meat and bones of everything. Bill, you've just arrived just on time. All right, so let's get going on what we did and what we're doing. So last week, just as a reminder, we kind of went over optimization patterns. We talked about data locality and the dirty flag patterns. We also talked about decoupling patterns, so the component pattern and behavioral patterns, the strategy pattern, and how they linked into the entity component system, which I told you guys we'd probably circle back on after I gave you a little about a homework assignment to go into, which was take a look at dots. Remember, I kind of asked you guys that. Did anyone have a chance to look at the dots tutorial online that I kind of asked you to do? If you did, that's great. So again, I'm looking for check marks in the participants panel if you had a chance to look at it. If you haven't had a chance to, take a look at it. I think it's something that might help you in your final test. If I ask you to do anything with dots, it'll be there. Okay. So that is what we did last week. What we're doing this week, again, like I talked about earlier, is human interface devices, HIDs. We're also going to look at Unity's new input system. And for those people who haven't had a chance to look at that, that's what we're going to be doing. And then we're going to get into an in-class exercise, which is kind of at the break. So we'll take a short break, and then I'll get you guys to download everything you need if you haven't had a chance to do that already, and then get into your in-class exercise. Okay? So, human interface devices. When we look at our map of all the components and subsystems that are kind of built into our game engine architecture, we can easily see that our human interface device, and I'm saying easily, kind of facetiously, if you look right there, you can see that it's like this really small component in this big mess of components that are part of our game engine architecture. So that's kind of where it sits. But it's a key component, right? I mean, without human interface, we don't have a game. And without a player, we don't have a game, right? Which is why we play the game. So let's think about these human interface devices. And we've had many different kinds of human interface devices over the years. But really, it's all about inputs and outputs. A lot of times it's kind of a combination of, especially on a PC, platform, it's keyboard, mouse, gamepads. Those are the kind of things that that allow us to interface with the machine. Talk about machine interface in a second. As well as there has been a trend over the last little while to improve immersion by creating these specialized user interfaces, that allow us to to give us a sense that we're actually in the game. Right, and this is outside of just VR. I'm talking about, like you can see the picture here. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So let's do a little bit of definition stuff, and I'm not going to read all of this, but you can. This is from Wikipedia and a couple sources. But I wanted to talk about this human interface device. It's a way of kind of connecting with a computer or some other kind of mechanical device. There are different types of human interface devices, and depending on the definition we look at, there's also something involved with human-computer interaction, right? So, which is kind of an integral part of the user interface, right? So you're going to learn more about HCI, I believe, if I'm not wrong, next semester. I think it's next semester you guys get HCI, so that's kind of a key part. So again, there's two pieces. There's the human interface device itself, and then the design of the interface. How do we connect to the machine? How do we do that? So let's talk about HCI just a little bit, and that's like a really small bit again. We just mentioned it, human-computer interaction. The two parts are design, right, and then the interface itself. How do I design my device for the interface? And again, we want to focus on the user, people, right, and how they connect to computers or other kind of devices, right? So from a research perspective, a lot of times we think about making these unique devices. We use maker spaces and those kind of things when we want a device that doesn't really exist. So that's also another opportunity for us when we talk about HIDs, right? How can we make devices that fit the need? And you're going to see more and more of those devices kind of emerge, I believe, over the years. And think about all the kind of controllers and things like that you've had access to over the years. You've played different consoles with different consoles, and you've had different controllers and different kind of things, right? So let's get into some questions here. So imagine here we got Mario here, and we're talking about HID and HCI, right? So what is it? Let's think about this scenario here. Mario, you know what? He's also a player. He's not just a figure out of unreality, right? So he wants to play. He wants to get some inputs, right? He's going to input into the system, and he wants to play Pac-Man, right? So think about how many inputs does the old Pac-Man game really have? Any takers on that one? Can anyone remember Pac-Man? I know that it's a little bit long in the tooth. 4, Logan. All right, no problem. Yeah, you got a directional input. You got a joystick, a little bit. So you've got some, Logan kind of hit it though. He said 4 because really at the end of the day, even though we only have one controller, a joystick, right? Pac-Man can go in 4 directions. So in fact, one device can give us, different kinds of raw input that we can use. Isn't there a pause button too? That's a good question. I don't know, Bill. Can you remember if there's a pause button on Pac-Man? I'm not sure that I can remember, but maybe you can.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, exactly.
Pac-Man.
Well, it's been a long time, and mine was more Miss Pac-Man, so I never remembered any kind of button at all, like a pause button. That'd be awesome if you could pause.
No.
But we couldn't pause before. You had to play, right? So, all right, thank you for that. So, yeah, okay, how about this? How could you enhance this game? Think about this. If you took Pac-Man today, right, beyond, putting it on a console, what could you do to make it more fun, more interactive? It's the same Mario, but he wants to play a different Pac-Man. What would you do? All right, so, hey, Dylan just said it, adding a pause button. Yeah, a lot of times we have this, culture nowadays where we want to play, and then when we get tired, we want to take a break and come back. And back in the day in the arcade, it was a different scenario, a different use case. We'd go there, and you'd want to put as many quarters as you could, so that way you could play Pac-Man to death, and until you're poor, one or the other. Yeah, that would be awesome. Pause. Anyone else? Saving a level. That'd be awesome. Yeah, saving a level. I mean, the modern day Pac-Man, the consoles had that capability where you can kind of save your progress. But it wasn't really the old Pac-Man. So that's that's a feature that you're talking about. But let's think about interactivity. Let's think about HIDs for a second. So if I had a user interface, an HID, if I could modify my user interface for Pac-Man. I know this is a simple scenario, but what can we do besides a pause button to make it more interesting? Anyone else have any other ideas? A turn left and a turn right button instead of a joystick. Okay. Any other takers? So we got a couple more buttons. I'm not sure, Kyle. I think that might be less responsive, but it would remind me more of a pinball machine, which actually, if you would think about it, is where video games kind of came out of, if you think about it. No other takers. Yeah, so there could be some kind of unique interface. Inputs, Roderick, for sure, is what we're looking at. So if you're going to change the game, if you could modify the game itself and add a different kind of input device, what could make the game more interesting is the question. If there is such a thing. A quick restart button. I like that. Yeah. So again, more some way to store and activate the power pellets. Sure. Right. So again, think about this. What we're saying is we want to enhance the game, the playability, right? Save states. Yeah. We talked about that already. So Pac-Man itself, the real game is, you had a bunch of pellets. You're eating the pellets, and the idea behind it is the goal behind the game is, kind of eating all the pellets before the ghosts get you, right? All right, how about this? If we have a device, so we're making some other devices, how would I connect that device? Would it be right on the console again? These buttons, these features that we're talking about, think about the old Pac-Man console. We just connect them right on there. Are there any other ideas? Guys, I'm looking for creativity here. Again, I could think about putting buttons on next to the joystick, but that's, I'm not sure is that the best scenario, is what I'm saying. And think about, you standing up in front of a Pac-Man game. VR. It's interesting you say that, Dylan. Yes, VR, it can happen. That'd be pretty scary, actually. A massive ghost chasing you in VR. And scary games in VR can really be scary too. So depending on how realistic you make that ghost. A glove controller. Okay, explain, Michael. I need more detail than just a glove controller. So how would that work? And how would that enhance the game? I know it's tough. It's a Nintendo Power Glove. Okay, yeah, that's one of them. I'm not sure. Did you guys ever think that power gloves were any good? Every glove that I've ever used is either too hot, too small, or breaks. I don't know about you guys, but it's always like I've tried them out, and every single time I'm like, yeah, this just isn't right? So yeah, I'm not sure about gloves. So now that we have got outputs or inputs, we can get outputs, some stuff that comes back at us. So depending on how we connect our device, so again, we can picture other things. Now, in the old scenario that we're talking about, where we had a kind of arcade console, a massive box, right, that we kind of would stay in front of or sit in front of, one of the two, whether it's sitting down version or the standing up version. I mean, I could picture the device being physically on the box. All right, that's that's how I can picture it myself. But you're going to get inputs from the device. You can give inputs to the device, and you get outputs back from the device. So let me think about some outputs now. How can it make it better for you guys from an output perspective? And think about what the game can give you just besides sound and visuals. Is there something else we can get from the game? Think about modern controllers, modern consoles. What other things can we get out of modern controllers and consoles? Okay, let's not say vibrating. Let's say rumble, all right, because vibrating might be wrong. But haptic feedback, yeah, I like that. That's a good technical term with stuff. I like that. And to me, yeah, I mean, think about, okay, so now where would we put the haptic feedback? That's another crazy thing. Will we put the haptic feedback when Pac-Man got eaten by a ghost, when we picked up a pellet? Where can we put that kind of stuff? And how would that make sense from a game design perspective? So food for thought. When he dies, when he heats, power pellet. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of places for that, for sure. When you eat a pellet or a ghost. When you eat a ghost, yeah, that's pretty cool. So again, all these things that we're talking about is good feedback for the player, which what we talked about earlier, which is it improves immersion, and it could potentially modify or modernize the game and make it more interesting. I'm not sure if it would be better. I mean, there are limitations to the game design itself, but I think it would be more interesting and maybe even revive Pac-Man again to some degree. So how about this picture? I love this one. So in Japan, in Shinjuku, I'm not sure if Bill, if you've ever been in that section of Japan, but they've got these VR kind of like malls. From what I understand, this VR zone that you can play VR games, but they actually connect you to this massive device like this, right? And you feel like you're actually playing in an environment, not only with an HTC Vive, let's say, in VR, but also physically feeling like you're in the Mario Kart. All right. So, what are your thoughts around this? Do you think it's necessary? Do you think it would improve immersion? Take it away? Could you foresee any problems with this kind of scenario? What are your thoughts, guys? Actually, what I should say is I was reading this thing lately on LinkedIn, and they said, don't ask people what their thoughts are. People like to hear about, talk about their reactions, is what I saw on LinkedIn today. So what's your reaction? What's your reaction to this, guys? No thoughts. Okay, I don't want to ask about thoughts. I mean, to me personally, just, as you guys are answering, to me personally, when I think, for me, anything that's more realistic. I mean, we've been playing car simulators for a very long time. Michael says novelty. Yeah, for sure, novelty. But I think it's part of why we're doing VR in the first place, immersion, right? For me, the dream of VR is the holodeck from Star Trek, really, right? Being immersed in a reality that's indistinguishable from our own. But here's something from Roderick. Well, VR is limited by the level of immersion it gives senses-wise. It looks fun, but I don't know how well it would feel physically in terms of moving the cart. Yeah, I mean, I think there's advantages to this. You could get your device. I mean, it looks like there's some kind of hydraulics or something in there that can get you to move, to tilt when you're inside the Mario Kart as well. Dylan says you crash into bananas on purpose, right? Logan says you worry it would make you motion sick. Yeah, there's a lot of people who get motion sick with VR by itself. Can you imagine your inner ears telling you that you're in a car, in a cart, but then, or it's not telling you that you're in a cart, but now you're kind of leaning, I don't know, maybe it'd be less motion sick because, you're kind of, closer to what it would feel like in the real experience. The Tetris effect. Explain, Kyle. What's the Tetris effect? VR Tetris, yeah. So to me, again, when I think about VR and a VR arcade like this, my thoughts are, I think it's going to get better. I think that's what's going to happen. I think we're going to see more and more more devices that are gonna help us be more immersive in the environment, that are gonna create more affordances, right, for us when we look at the real world, things that we know about the real world that we want to kind of bring in into VR. And sometimes designers make the mistake sometimes of bringing the exact same thing from the real world into VR when they have a set of controllers that maybe can't really mimic the real world. But here, what they're trying to do here, I believe, is trying to give you the most fun experience and to make you feel like you are one of the characters in Mario Kart. Do I think VR will ever replace traditional gaming? I'm not sure that's going to be the winning scenario, in my opinion. I think it's awesome. I think there's a lot of really cool things around it. But until the devices, in my opinion, get less obtrusive, like right now you get a big, hot head-mounted display that kind of goes on you, and you're in a world where you can't hear, if it's loud enough, anyone else around you. You can't see anyone except for the things that you see in VR. And there's a limitation in terms of the input that we're getting right now. We don't have a haptic suit necessarily that's for everybody. Eric just said it right here. There's a price barrier, I think, to entry, which is still today, even with the Oculus Quest 2 that just came out recently, hooking it up to a machine to give you a great experience, when it's not standalone, it's costly. The machine has to be still pretty hefty. But I think the obtrusive thing is the issue, right? You got to figure that this thing is on your head. You're feeling something on your face. I think if we look at like Black Mirror episodes where you put a little, device on your temple and then you're transported into the world, if we can dream like that for a second, I think that would be the best type of VR. But until it gets to that point, I think it'll be novelty. Look at the big console manufacturers. Xbox really never had a VR head-mounted display of any worth. Sony PlayStation VR was okay. They had more content, so that's how I made it live. But I'm not sure if they've ever announced for the PS5 that they're going to have a PSVR that is going to be upgraded in any way right now. So I don't think it's in their short-term plans. So until I think manufacturers, kind of get you to use it and it becomes cheap enough so that you can buy it just like you would a fancy mouse, like a gamer mouse, or some kind of flight stick or something like that. That's not too expensive. Like I would say under $100. When it gets to that threshold, and if it gives you a really good, value for your money, like in other words, like your screens are good, the material is a lot thinner, lighter. It's compatible with more people's faces. It's not compatible with everyone's eyes, their distance, the distance between their eyes, and so on. If you have a flatter face or a face that's a little bit more, rounder, sometimes it doesn't work properly. You get a different sense of, your peripheral vision is lost, and some people get sick with it because of the frame rate as well. Off topic, but how crazy would it be if actually we did make something like the Matrix a simulation? How crazy would it be? It would be pretty crazy. Some people think we're in a simulation already, Anthony, right? But again, but going back to it, it would be pretty crazy. I'm not sure that there's been a lot of books written upon it, and I think when we get to the point where we can use HIDs to connect to a device where it can replace reality, think about that. Really replace reality. There's a lot of people out there today that we're sitting in a COVID world right now that are remote, and if you could distract somebody enough where the virtual world is more fun than the real world, I think we might get into some trouble. But it might be fun along the way. I'm looking forward to it. Yep, that's perfect. Fermi paradox. Let's get into the next part. So let's continue with this stuff. So we've talked about HIDs in some ways, and there's a bunch of different kinds of controllers, some older ones and some newer ones. We've also got a ton of them from different game systems throughout the years. Again, I'm not going to go into all the different types, but there's been a lot of experiments. Some of them have passed, some of them have failed. Some devices have been out there, have been created, and are still in use today, even though they've been canceled, right, by the company. Novid Falcon is one of those devices it was out there. It was really cool, haptic device. It's not actually listed here, but it's it's been canceled. And it was a really cool interface device that gave us, I think it was 3 degrees of freedom. This haptic device, which looks like some kind of pen, or it could also be used for other things. We still use it in biomedical VR kind of studies and those kind of things. Again, these kind of devices have been canceled. They're not really something that they're being supported. There's lots of experiments out there. There's devices that we use every single day. Think about the human interface device we use that's in our pocket right now, or on your desk as you're watching this broadcast, right? So all those kind of human interface devices. And I think humans are going to continue to try and make more and more of these as the need arises, because we want to simulate a lot of the interactions that we see in the real world. A, having fun without hurting ourselves, and B, maybe creating an interaction that we can't really do in the real world for whatever reason, right? So lots and lots of reasons to do it. Some of it's remote sensing. Some of it is controlling something from at a distance. Think about this. We're all kind of working right now at a distance. Think about telepresence. A lot of things that we think about as well is, I know Professor Alvaro does a lot of his courses right now in VR. So we actually come into the course. We kind of log into Mozilla Hubs, which is something you guys should check out. And then we interface in VR, and we're all together. We kind of simulate what it's like to be in a classroom, which I think is awesome, right? But there are some disadvantages. We're not quite there. It doesn't feel right 100% of the time. And sometimes the interaction could be a distraction, which is not what we want. But really cool from a novelty perspective. Lots of accessories, not just devices, but accessories too. If I want to play, I want an add-on to the interaction, right? So I want to play with my human interface device, but then I can add something on, snap it on, and now I have additional capability, right? Which is kind of cool as well. So there's been a lot of things over the years, and I think they're going to continue to come up with them, like I said. So what's the goal? Like we talked about, to have this immersion. I love this one. This guy keeps on falling down over and over again. He really believes his vision is kind of, his entire scope of vision is full with this VR. The guy pushing from behind, you can see that that's happening. And, he's freaking out. This one here also freaks me out when I saw this one, where in VR, they've created a scenario. The designers have made a scenario where you feel like, you're walking a plank, and they've actually put a plank down on the floor. And so you feel that's happening. And so they're playing on some of your fears. And, and this is why, the things that they warn about in VR, we should, from a design perspective, keep in mind. Don't put big spiders in games, because some people have arachnophobia, right? Or put big warnings that say we've put spiders in this game, and they can be really scary, that kind of stuff. Because when you're in a game like this, you've got no choice. You can't look away. You are in the world, and that's another kind of disadvantage from being in VR. You'd have to take off your headset. How about something simple like this, right? Where we have, we have a game, a 2D game, but then we want to add on a human interface device, right, to improve interactivity and immersion, right? So it's not quite VR, but we create this kind of a light gun, and this goes back to Duck Hunt, right? Back in the day, we had Duck Hunt, just similar to what we see here. And you know what? It was a novel interface. It makes it interesting. It made it more interactive. It made us feel like we're actually, shooting something on the screen. And for a while, that was one of the most fun games that were out there. They actually exist today as well. If you actually go to some of the arcades, some of those rail shooters that we see in the arcades today, if they don't disappear, as an aside, I've heard lately that Palladium in Mississauga has finally closed its doors. One of the biggest arcades that we've had over that have lasted all this time, and they've closed their doors because of COVID. But they've had a lot of video games that have gone in and out of there, and rail shooters like Time Cop and a bunch of other stuff where you actually have a real device, some kind of weapon in your hands, and it's the same idea. You're using a light gun to shoot at the screen, and you're getting haptic feedback, right, in the arcades to make you feel like you're actually in the game, which makes it more fun, right? So anything like that, I think creativity plays a big role when it comes to how we create human interface devices to improve immersion. And when we have immersion, really what we have is players coming back, players believing, that they have a lot more fun, they're in the environment, and they can do more with it. So let's think about what those are. They're also known as player input-output components, and they can provide output in the form, like we talked about, of rumble, an audio, and a bunch of other stuff. Okay, and again, it's part of our architecture, our game engine architecture. From a system perspective, in my opinion, and I think it's showing here, it's a big feedback loop, right? We give input through some kind of controller, and then it goes through the system, right? And the input could be in the form of body movement, voice, speech recognition, some kind of autonomic response. We can get other kinds of inputs we don't have right now with the use of EMG, so that's muscular kind of tracking. When your muscles contract, they create a small charge, I guess. There's a difference in charge between when your muscle moves, you can pick up the muscle movement, or your electroencephalogram, an EEG, that kind of, you can put electrodes on your head to get input as well. All kinds of different kinds of things we can design. It gives input into the system. The computer processes that input. A lot of times when it's raw input, we have to process it because the human body gives off all kinds of additional waves and creates artifacts. So here's a scenario. Think about this. I put on a special helmet on your head that actually connects to your brain with some kind of electrodes, an electrode system. So really, depending on if you have hair, if you're bald, if you, if your head is shaped differently, if you move around with this thing, all those things can cause what we like to call artifacts in the signals. So we have clean signals that come from our body, right? And these signals, in the form of microvoltages, they come through, and then what we do with those signals is we use some kind of high pass or low pass filter, just like we learned on the audio side in Bill's course, right? As an example. And then what ends up happening is we create we boost the signal, we boost the gain a lot of times for this micro voltage, so that it is in a form that we can use again. And a lot of times when we boost the signal, we get additional artifacts, so we have to filter as much as possible. So that raw input is filtered, and then we can try and use it on the computer side. And then from there, what we do is we want to give back output from the computer, feedback back to the to our sensors, our human sensors, our eyes and our ears, and our tactile sensory system, in order for us to get back sensory feedback from the game or from the computer. So this big feedback loop is the thing that creates this immersion, right? In my opinion. So really kind of cool stuff. But there's issues, and let's talk about these issues really, really quickly. For example, this stuff, right? Latency, accuracy problems, drift issues, jitter, right, that can occur. And a lot of this stuff happens because there is a difference in time frame between the time that we're getting. Think about, we're sending a signal from our brain or from our bodies to the system. There's processing time, and then there's stuff that comes back out of the system. Now, obviously, some of this is becoming less and less as our hardware has become more, let's just say, robust and efficient. But there's still this stuff. It exists today, right? We see it when we play competitive video games, right? Think about that as a big feedback loop. We want to play Apex Legends or whatever Call of Duty game you're playing this season, and you're playing, and what you're seeing is, depending on where you are, depending on how many players there are in the game, depending on what your system is, you might get latency, and that latency can kill you, right? So, when you die because of latency, not because of being killed by another player, you die and you feel you're out of the, kind of breaks you out of the immersion. It kills your feeling of fun, right? So Those are the kind of things that we want to try and control and improve over the next little while, if we're going to improve our the way our human interaction, if you will, with our devices. So let's take a look at wireless devices. Here's another option. And this is some cool stuff. And some of you may have seen this stuff before. We actually have one of these, something like this in the lab. It's not quite like this where you can lean back on it, but it's very similar to this, right? And we also, it'd be nice. I mean, when we made a game, my team and I, we made a game, and we had to kind of create a tethering system just like this. Right, because our game in VR was very active. Manos Returns, you had to dive, you had to kind of work to defeat the human player. It was an asymmetrical game, VR versus non-VR, and we had to create something like a tethering system like this, right? And so, again, we've created these devices, right, in order for us to feel more and more immersed. And you can see that there's different solutions that people have come up with for the same kind of idea, right? Okay, but what about this latency and laggy stuff? Well, there's some videos here that I've included in the PowerPoint. I'm going to play a short clip right now. Again, we're also online live on the internet, so I can't play it all because it's like I'd break YouTube's agreements, right? We don't want to play YouTube within YouTube, which is what I'm going to do right now. So living with lag, this is a little video, and in this video you can look at the video itself. I'm just going to mute it here. But you can see that this person here is trying to hit the ball with their controller, a wireless controller on their head. So think about the lag that's happening here. We just talked about how, and they're wandering around trying to find the ball, right? It's kind of really, trippy, I think is the right word. And so think about what we just talked about when it comes to all this stuff. We just said that there's any kind of delay in time can cause jitter, can cause inaccuracy in terms of tracking, can cause lag, latency, all those kind of things, right? So here, I mean, especially when you're playing some kind of game like this where you're expected to kind of keep up with the ball, and this is a very interesting video if you have a chance to watch it later on, guys, because they do other things, other experiments with this. I'm going to fast forward here so you can see some of the other experiments they do. They do kind of an exercise class, where the person's actually wearing a device and they're trying to keep up with the class, right? So that's kind of interesting, right? And she can't do it, right? She's like, wait, no, I'm just off, right? Because she's hearing the music, but she's trying to keep up by having this device in her head. Here's another thing they try and do. They're trying to, this is really dangerous, cooking with a VR device on their head, and they're obviously seeing something in VR, right? But at the same time, and here's what they're seeing on this side. Actually, they're feeding through, instead of VR, they're actually seeing through this thing as a camera, right? So, and they're getting kind of a shorter or a longer response time. So it's like VR, but it's actually not VR. It's just something that's occluding our vision, that's slowing things down for us. So that's kind of an interesting video to look at. Living with lag, which is kind of cool. The other one I want to talk about was, how about this guy, right? He's never had a chance maybe to wear kind of a device before, and he wants to play ping pong. This is a little talk show. It's kind of a short video here again. He wants to play and he falls over, right? So he's trying to figure things out. These guys are making fun of him. They're like, can't believe that guy, and the virtual kind of robot that's in there, it's playing with him, and he really feels like it's real. So he's like trying to get himself up by putting his hand on the table or something. It's it's pretty bizarre. So his immersion, his level of immersion, he really believes that the stuff that he's seeing, or he's not understanding how this thing is working, but it's kind of interesting. So kind of a virtual ping pong, that one. So I think these are things that when I look at them, I'm like, and going back to what was asked earlier today, which was, so what do you think? Do you think that VR is going to be the way of the future for video games? I think we have a way to go, but from a lot of reasons, right? Not just because of the device itself that may be not as robust, but also our human experience. We're not good with this kind of stuff yet. We're not used to it. It's not like playing a video game. And by the way, just thinking about that for a second, think about that controller that we're all used to using right now on a console. It wasn't always like that. Think about us playing a game like Doom or Wolfenstein when it first came out, right? They were trying to figure out how to play something in 3D and trying to perfect the controller over time so that way it was more natural for us to play in 3D when we're looking at a 2D screen. That took a long time for us to figure that out. It took, I would say, a better part of a decade for us to kind of to make a better and better controller with controls that were more natural for a hand position and all those kind of things. It took a while. It's going to take longer for VR, for it to become more natural and for us to get used to using a device like this. One of the biggest challenges we have right now in VR, when we make a VR simulation, and Bill is here, which is great, he can attest to this as well, is you make a simulation for nuclear science as an example, and then you give it to someone who's never used VR or never played a video game before. What happens? It's not great sometimes. Sometimes the person who's using it, who never played a video game before, who's never used a controller before in their life, but now they're also immersed at the same time and they're inside of a mine or they're inside of a nuclear reactor or something like that. What are they looking at? Is it the novelty of wearing the head-mounted display? Are they trying to figure out the controls to try and teleport in VR? Which thing are they going to do first? And what we have here is a good case of cognitive load, maybe cognitive overload that happens to people, and they can't really figure out the system, and it becomes almost unusable, at least until they get acclimated. So this guy is trying to get acclimated, and he can't, right? He's just not able to. Maybe he's just not used to playing games. So other things to think about when we talk about human interface devices are trends, and there's a ton of trends. We talked about accessories, so think about making custom user interfaces for games. And this guy, what he does is he uses Makerspace to create an accessory that goes on top of a regular controller. He builds it with a 3D printer, and what he's doing here is he wants it so that he can make a little controller to play something like Mario Kart again. Because he feels, and he believes it, and if you watch his video, he talks about how it's cheap and easy to build using modern 3D printers. You can assemble it yourself, and after you do, then what you have, and it snaps right on, because that's how kind of good they've made it, snaps right in. Then what you can do is you can use it so that way as if you're using a wheel, as opposed to trying to use two sticks, because the case that he's talking about is that using a twin stick controller to control a vehicle in a video game isn't accurate. It gives you the wrong sense of kind of immersion. It actually breaks your immersion. So instead of buying an expensive wheel, which would be better, I think, as we can use the same kind of experiences from the real world, right? And here you're seeing him how he's using it. And he talks about this. He says it's a lot better because all you're doing is you're modifying, what you already have, right, with, a little bit of ingenuity to create a more immersive experience, which is what we're doing here, right? So this is pretty cool. And but then after his talk, he discusses, which is kind of cool. Hey, by the way, guys, you know what? It's not perfect, but it's better than what it was before, right? It's better, and so that's what we're doing. There's a lot of opportunity here for us to improve the stuff that we're doing. So before I move on, so for your games, you're making a game right now, for James and for your GDW. How are your games? Could you think of a human interface device if we were all together, we weren't remote the way we are? Could you think of a human interface device that might work better in your games, the games you're making? Anyone have any thoughts on that? Or sorry, reactions to what I just said. We don't want to say thoughts anymore for some reason. So I know for me, when I was doing this course with Dr. Alvaro, one of the things we did a VR game, and I can tell you it was something that was good, and it's something that really slowed us down when it came to development. And the reason for this is because we were learning to do two things at the same time, right? We were learning to figure out how to use this, the head-mounted display, which was cool. It gave us another interaction for our players. We also thought about, hey, networking is going to be really tough with this thing. Maybe what we want to do is we want to create an asymmetrical interface where, there's one player who can play normally. Maybe we can market this thing so that way in the future someone can play Manos, our VR player, without being in VR, right? A lot of times whenever we have games like that in other scenarios, they don't go well. Imagine trying to play a game specifically made for VR without using a VR headset. And in my mind, I'm thinking something like Star Trek Bridge Crew. If you ever try and play that game, which was made by Ubisoft, actually, I found that when I was playing it, it was not that great. In VR, it was awesome, right? I mean, if you're a Star Trek fan, you were on the bridge of the Enterprise, right? But as a game, a standalone game by itself without VR, if it's specifically made for VR, it didn't give us the same experience. So we thought about, let's make an asymmetrical experience where we have a player that's always playing in non-VR, where you could decide to play one of our heroes kind of against Manos. Kyle says, I had made a VR game with my group. I never got to play it properly because I don't own a VR headset and Gamescom never happened. Yeah, I'm sorry, Kyle. I know it was kind of a weird time this year you're talking about, right? But, it's a challenge when it comes to VR in general. And some of it is because not all of us have headsets. One of the problems we had when we were developing stuff with a device like this is not everyone had a VR device, so we'd have to pass it around because it was a thing to do. If we make a custom device, like it says here in the slide, a custom user interface, it kind of makes sense that everyone should have a custom interface if they're going to include it in the game for testing, and that was a real challenge for us. So it provides challenges out of the box kind of thing. The other thing is that, and this is what people say a lot of times, they say like VR is a novelty, right? VR is a gimmick. Human interface devices that are, that are custom like this, they're a gimmick. We don't really need them. Let's go back to the tried and true gamepad or controller because it makes more sense. This is something that we know works. Why do we need something new? I personally disagree with that statement. I think that there's a lot of things we can learn that are still out there. Human ingenuity and human creativity can come up with really cool new ways of interacting. And not just with the machine, but with each other. Even in a remote, disconnected world, kind of like the way we are right now. Anyway, so that's a little bit about trends. I also want to talk about not just trends, but what about BCIs? What are BCIs? Anyone ever had a chance to think about a brain-computer interface? Are you guys excited about that kind of thing? So I've kind of put the definition of what a BCI is here. Right? To me, that was always the best. I mean, we talked about the Matrix, right? We just talked about it earlier today. How being immersed in the Matrix, right? That was a true brain-computer interface that they showed us in that movie from the 1990s, right? Raj says Ubisoft, so I'll drop this here. Really, right now? That's terrible, Raj. Wow. That is not good. We should look into that. Yeah, it is unfortunate. I wonder, I haven't heard anything about that at all. Wow, that's terrible. Anyways, I'm going to move on, but I'm going to come back to that later. QWERTY is technically awful, yet everyone learns because it's the most common. No one changes it because it takes time to relearn. You're talking about the keyboard. Yeah, I agree. It is not that great. And they've come up with different keyboards that are shaped in different ways, but that allow us to interact a little bit easier. But like you said, there's a learning curve. What about these things that I talked about? These brain-computer interface. Anyone ever thought about these at all? Any kind of interest in brain-computer interfaces? I know we have a researcher here at the university. At the university, I'm not here, but. Bill, do you know the name of the lady that's she's a specialist in BCI? She's got her PhD in that kind of thing. Do you know about it at all?
What is that? Is that Immersion?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. She's a specialist in BCI, yeah?
Yep, she knows that stuff. Very good. Very good.
And a lot of times we use BCIs for simulations and those kind of things because we want to connect, right? We want to connect to the computer, and we want to reduce that thing we talked about earlier, which is lag and latency. We want to take that away, and a lot of times we want to explore new interactions that we can do with our brain, not just BCIs, but also things like eye trackers, anything like that that is more, that uses human biometrics to connect with or to interact with. There's a lot of stuff out there like that. Edward says, I like the idea of neural implants, but if it's connected to the internet, I fear getting ads streamed directly into my brain. Yeah, that's a big one. I've seen that one before. Matthew says, I don't know if it was a BCI, but I remember I watched a video about a study where they stimulated the brain with charges to essentially put someone into the flow state and enhance their cognitive processing. Yeah, and that's what they're actually thinking about with the next slide, which is this thing, Neuralink, which is a real thing, right? You've got Elon Musk, which many people think is the Tony Stark of kind of the modern day, or the modern Bruce Wayne, maybe in some ways, just instead of being a superhero. And he's come up with several billion-dollar companies, Tesla and SpaceX, as well as Neuralink. And Neuralink is this company that is focusing on what they're thinking about as cognitive enhancement, or intelligence augmentation instead of artificial intelligence, which is something that we want to kind of connect with. And he's been thinking about this because he's a dreamer. That's one thing I like about Elon Musk. He talks about the future and he wants to make it happen. He thinks about a day when we can all be connected to the internet directly without an interface, without having a human interface device other than the one that's in our brain, right? So what about the ethical issues around this? How do people feel about having something directly in their brain? And there's been a lot of science fiction writers that have talked about this. But think about this: if you had a link, let's just call it links. You have a couple of links in your head. One of them maybe gives you a feed, right, to to your favorite news channel, and another one, you can be talking with your friend at the same time, and another one you can be playing a video game if you feel like it. Can we cope with that much information all coming at us at the same time? And the other question I have, and here's the ethics part: can we shut it down? Would we be allowed to if it was cheap enough for us to use in the future? Eye contacts or something. So Dylan, why just eye contacts? Why do you feel? Kennedy says she'd do it, but why do you feel that you wouldn't want it something in your brain? Why not? Kennedy says she didn't want TikTok streamed directly to her brain, right? To watch the cat videos, Kennedy? What would you watch on TikTok all day long, right? That's pretty crazy stuff there. Or just dancing, the dancing videos that happen on TikTok. That's the major stuff that happens there. But Dylan, talk to me about why eye contacts and why not having it in your brain directly. I'm curious. Memes. There you go, Kennedy. Gotta go full cyberpunk. Yeah. What if you got a virus? There's one. Hey, look, they made that game Watch Dogs that just came out that is all around a virus, right? Daniel says he doesn't trust capitalism entities enough to think they wouldn't mess with your head, and you're probably right. It can turn into a huge problem if they got hacked. Yeah. See, so there's some stuff. And Kennedy says, my brain is already messed up enough. It can take some more. It can take really okay. Security would be a thing for sure, Nathan. Yeah. That's a really great point, Roderick. I think there would be long-term effects we wouldn't understand until it actually happened. And I'm just reading some of the comments here for the people online. I think that, there's I think we're going to get closer to it. I think it's inevitable. We just talked about immersion and this idea that we're going to have. We want to immerse ourselves in the interaction. We want to immerse ourselves and connect to the computer, and through the connection to the computer, connect to each other somehow, or even do something that we're not able to do, physically. We're not able to do. There's people who don't have the ability, who are not able enough to run, or who are not able enough to ride a horse, or to fight, or to act out whatever fantasy that they want to act out, and it'll give us a chance to do that. And it'll immerse us into the point where we'll feel like we're actually there. Daniel says, I don't want to spend $499 a month to upgrade to the platinum license in order to not have ads play in my head 24/7. Yeah. Or what if it's a subscription service? Let's take that further, and your subscription runs out. Like we have in that, there was a show that came up on Amazon called Upload, which is kind of interesting as well. So yeah, there's a lot of ethical issues around this. Once we start fooling around with our brains and our bodies, I think, and there was for a long time. I mean, think about other things that we've done. We've done body modifications like this before. This isn't the first time. For example, some kind of heart stimulator, right? That stimulates your heart all the time. Artificial hearts, artificial, ears, artificial, different kinds of parts that we have. And we're not full cyberpunk, but we've got a lot of stuff out there already that is an enhancement or a replacement for what we have right now. And there's a lot of ethical issues around that. Some people are against it. There's a lot of people out there that don't like any artificial parts, even an artificial limb. They're not into that at all, right? So, and they're against it, like hardcore against it, right? So, Nathan says, joining a Discord call directly through my brain would be neat. Yeah, I don't know. I think I've had enough with Discord sometimes. But, sometimes it's so loud and there's so much volume from people talking that I just want to shut it down. So having the homies on speed dial 24/7, yeah, it's too much for me. Let's move on to some of this. So Neuralink, and I think about Neuralink when it first came out, and I thought it was a joke. I was like, come on, it can't be that Elon Musk is doing something else like this. And it's real. It's real, guys. Let's think about other kind of interactions. We can modify the stuff that we already have. We just talked about, controls that have been out there for a long time. And we're trying to improve stuff. What about that one-handed controller? Do you think it makes any sense? I mean, they've come up with it in different ways. But right now we've been using two hands, and it takes up all of our time, and all of our attention is with a two-handed controller. Do you think there's any kind of case for a single-handed controller? What are your thoughts around that? Should help for accessibility. Yeah, I like that. That's a really great thought. And accessibility and inclusive, kind of inclusiveness is something as designers we should always be thinking about. Carpal tunnel. Yeah, there's a lot of buttons on this thing at the same time, right? But I want to go in a direction like this, right? So we have one-handed controllers that have been created. People have thought about things to simplify and to give the power of gaming in a hand. But they kind of done that right now, haven't they? With the Quest controller. Here's something that's more, let's just say, polished, right? You could use the Quest controller in one hand to play Beat Saber, right? As an example, there's a game that's VR, mainly VR, and I think it doesn't work. The whole idea of Beat Saber not being in VR is crazy, right? So, but think about this: your Oculus controller, right, which has evolved over time, is something that is exactly what we just saw earlier, right? It's not really you're right. It's not really a one-handed replacement, like for DualShock. And I think even for the Oculus stuff, can you do a lot of things in one hand? Yes. I think the great thing about splitting your controller into two hands is really fantastic, because it gives us a chance to, especially in VR, to point or to interact with different things with either hand at the same time. And I think it gives us two things: accessibility, inclusiveness, and the ability for us to, again, to improve immersiveness. And at the beginning, when we first had VR, there was no controller. It was just a headset, right? So I think over time they've realized that we need to interact with something other than just gaze, gazing at something and pointing at something with our, some kind of gaze pointer that's inside of our VR headset. I'm just going to move on to a couple things before we take a break. And one thing to note is our stuff that we're doing here. There's all kinds of controls and buttons that are built into our controller. Our controller has evolved. Literally, the evolution of controllers over time. I'm not going to go into that. There are other courses for those things. But our controller has gotten better and better over time. And again, because of the demands of the type of video games that have come out. And, console companies, outfits like Microsoft and Sony have come out with, these things. And you can see that there's a lot of little buttons and controls that we have on this thing. And these are all the things that you would need if you want to connect to something like the old input system for Unity. And there's two of them, right? So I've just borrowed it from Jimmy Vegas here. But there's a set of controls and inputs, so you see like joystick button 0 and so on, for the Xbox from a mapping perspective, and there's also one for the PlayStation, all right? So again, similar mapping. But one thing that we had a problem with, and Unity had a problem with as well, is all of these raw inputs, right? A bunch of raw inputs. And one of the things that the PlayStation controller had that was different than the Xbox was the touchpad. And I just want to put it out there for you guys. How many people actually use the touchpad for gaming? If you have a PlayStation. I mean, it was out there. It was something that Sony introduced. But how many people actually use that thing for any kind of gaming at all? Because you can use it, like it was made so that it could be like a touchpad on the controller itself. So me personally, whenever I played, a PS4 game or something like that, I don't think there's a lot of call for me using the touchpad. Not a lot. There's some games that used it, but very rare, right? So, spray painting side quests, yeah. Infinite Second Son, yeah, that's right. I don't see a lot of use for that. So there's a lot of stuff, like we said, from an evolution perspective that's come out. Touchpad, which was useless. I think so too. I didn't think it was that useful, but they have it, and then Unity supported it. So imagine if they come up with like 10 more of these things, or they've just now released all the modern consoles, right? So I think it was on the 10th they released the Xbox, and on the 12th, I think yesterday, they officially released the PS5, right? So they're if you haven't had a chance to pre-order them, chances are you're not going to get them before Christmas at this point, or the holiday season. But imagine they're also going to have their own set of controllers. Is Unity or a commercial game engine going to continue to do this kind of stuff by kind of getting input from every single button and everything else specifically for their control? And I think it's wrong. The old way of how they did input before with Unity was flawed, and a lot of times you use plugins because it made access and input from a Unity perspective better than the actual built-in input system. So what they've come out with, right, which is what we're going to do after the break, I'm going to go into more detail with you guys, is the new Unity input system. So some of you have used it, and this is the second part, which is the interactive part that we're going to be working with. There is if you go up to Canvas, we're just going to take a short break in a second, but if you go up to Canvas, like I mentioned earlier, on Canvas, there is an exercise that we're going to start doing. So Lecture 9 has kind of an exercise built into it that we're going to be working with. There is a project that I'd like you guys to download called Procedural 2D, which I'm going to view with you guys in a second, as well as the assignment portion, which is right here. So it's, again, all of our in-class exercises are bonuses. This one here, again, is due November 14th. That's tomorrow night at midnight for extra bonus marks. So I think there's a chance for us to do that after the break. And what we're going to do is we're going to be exploring Unity's input system and how that can make interaction better, right? As a preview, I'm just going to hop down to this slide right here. This is what the new input system looks like. We have a bunch of inputs. We don't know which ones they are. It goes through the Unity engine, our commercial game engine, into the input system. And then what happens is our actions are abstracted. So the Unity system doesn't really know, the new input system doesn't know what actions are going to be bound to what, to kind of what methods and what devices are going to be bound to the actions. So what does this remind you of? And if this could be a great question on a final exam, as an example, guys. Hint, hint. What does this remind you of? What kind of design patterns is Unity using here, besides the component system? Think about the design patterns that they thought about. So Anthony says, got this in our game already. It's neat stuff. That's great. And Hunter also agrees. We're going to do another little exercise today, guys, to give you another chance to work with that. Kyle says command. Absolutely. Decoupling our commands, or using the command design pattern, right? Anyone else? Matthew says you're also using it as well. Observer pattern is also something. So they're using the command, the observer pattern. They're using the event queue, and they're also using coroutines to make this new Unity system work the way it's supposed to work. So all the stuff that we've been talking about through the entire semester, Unity, which is kind of the leading edge when it comes to a commercial game engine. Some of the newest games that have come out through Unity and Unreal. They have the same idea. They want to decouple, right, their input system. One of the challenges we had with VR, and we'll stop after this kind of comment here, is when we use things like Steam VR. One of the challenges with Steam VR is what they had a very abstract way of doing their connections with VR, their bindings with their inputs, right? And it was quite confusing, right? So now what Unity's done is said something like this. They said, look, we're going to create a system that's going to be flexible enough, so we're not going to care what the new input scheme is going to be. We're not going to care about these kind of maps anymore. We don't care which button maps to what action. All we care about is that you have some kind of controller, and I'm going to show you later on, it actually detects all of my input devices, even things that really aren't made for input right now. And it allows us to create experiences through the game engine where we might have some new device, whatever it's going to be, whether I want to make a custom device, custom human interface device, or something that's just come out, right? Or maybe something new on a new console that's come out from Sony or Microsoft or someone else. So this is the kind of the way that modern game engines are going, and it's something to think about for your game engine if you were going to make something on your own, using the design patterns that we talked about all semester. Okay, guys, I want to pause it here. We've gone for about an hour or so. I think this will take about a 10-minute break, and when we come back, we'll do our little in-class exercise for bonus marks, and then we'll be done for the day. So let's take 10. We're sitting at around 3:25 right now. We'll come back around 3:35 with our in-class exercise. I will guide you through it and make sure everyone knows what to do. All right, I'm going to stop recording on YouTube now. For those people on YouTube, we'll see you next week. All right, guys, we're not recording